Hello, Joanna. A huge welcome to the
Oh,
show.
thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, I'm really happy you are. And we are, as we were just saying, going to dive deep into the depths of the descent. And starting there, and it's a topic I absolutely love too. I think this is going to be a gorgeous, exploration of all of our favorite things, but it's not necessarily everyone's favorite direction
No,
to journey into.
no,
So,
it's
yeah, how did this become something that you feel so passionately about that is,
not.
is a core part of your work?
I think that coming to this work for me has always kind of walked that thin line between, a lot of intention and choice and just kind of feeling fated and handed something. Um, and
Know that
and
one.
I've always, my training is in Jungian psychology. I have a PhD in Jungian and archetypal psychology, and I'm currently pursuing analytical training. And so there's that part of myself, but really, the seeds of that have always really been a part of me as a child. I always read myth, I always read fairy tale. My mom has a great story of me like going to bed and never wanting to read a book, but always wanting her to tell me real stories about her life. you know
Oh, lovely.
and it's just always, I think looking at the world psychologically and socially and kind of mythically, and never really being that interested in the kind of mainstream story is very baked into
Mm.
me. um i found I found Jung in my mid 20s at a time in my life where I was really trying to make a transition out of a more kind of carefree youthful place that was really beautiful but not that rewarding. And I I literally found this book by Anthony Stevens called On Young in a library, and it was the cover of that book is kind of a black and gray color, and the On Young is in red, which is like a color palette that would attract me. And I
Mm.
just saw it and like was like, oh, that's nice.
Like the
And
case of
like,
like, do judge a book by its cover.
but like literally, I was like, those are nice colors, like that simple. and yeah, I read the book in like a weekend, I believe. And it was an interesting experience for me. And I don't mean this hubristically, as I don't feel like I learned anything in the book. I didn't know that there were ideas and a framework to describe a way of understanding that felt like so intuitive and clear to me. It was like, oh yeah, obviously, obviously, obviously. But I didn't know
Mm.
that this is what that was called. And I didn't know that those two things came together. And so I was so
Oh, so
inspired
can I
by
just
that. I
stop you
made this.
there? There's something
Yeah.
like what you just named there. I think there's something really special because it certainly doesn't sound like hubris to me. It's I think naming something that is like so deeply human and primal.
Mhm.
Um, we had Michael Mead on the show last
Mhm.
week. We were talking very much about the way that myth, like, it touches something so deep in ourselves. It can feel like a remembrance. It can feel like it touches in something that was always there, and yet we
Yeah.
didn't have the words for it. We didn't have the conscious knowing of it.
Yes. I mean, it's exactly that, right?
Mm,
And that the aliveness, right? That, or the
yes.
animation that comes from, oh, that feels aligned for me. And why? Why does that feel aligned? It's
Mm,
not actually not even an irrelevant or a really particularly interesting question. It's like
mm.
it just is. And I think Jung in this way of being, and particularly a psychology, as we'll, of course, get into, that is not interested in the surface.
Mm.
I've never been able to understand that for 1 minute of the attitude, or really the belief that we could tend ourselves by not looking at the very foundation of ourselves and our very foundation of what it means to be human on a larger level. And so I think finding the psychology that just so escorted the Western mind into that more, animate, embodied, ensouled place was like, oh yeah, of course. And so it gave me a lot of energy and a lot of clarity. And I applied to, I did my master's and doctorate at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California, and applied very quickly. And it was just kind of like this path that unfolded. The book, in which, you know, is drawing you to my work, came from my doctoral dissertation, and which I spent about a year working with a fabulous editor to take it from some kind of highfalutin thing that nobody on this planet would ever want to read into something that, you know, is actually usable to people. And the story of that book came from an experience where my younger brother had a very severe brain injury, and which is an enormous underworld experience that, you know, kind of rips you out of your normal life. And one of the questions that really came from the book is, in the months that in his healing and his journey, one of the things that was said a lot is, you know, like, be strong. He's a good person. He'll make it. He's a hero. Be a hero, which seeded this real curiosity into me of what do we actually mean when we say that. And this idea of, like, of course my brother's a beautiful soul, and that doesn't mean that he's going to get life in this situation, which fortunately he did, but that's not actually a prerequisite. And just this idea of this kind of like heroic strength that the experience really eroded in me, and has been a part of my own inner work to kind of erode that high functioning hero in myself, to be more present for what is. And so the book in its own way is kind of my process of that in myself, and the offering of kind of how I found my way into revaluing a different part of life. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's a good summation of how I got here.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing. It's yes, a beautiful summation. It's really it's triggered about 50 different strands directions we can now go in. What I was pondering is how, as you say, Jung, and I'm a huge Jung fangirl too, just to be clear. So, like, he absolutely invites us into what is really kind of ancient knowing. An aspect to
100%.
my own path is shamanism, which is like so much of what's found in Jung's work, you know, was predated via a more shamanic lens. And yet, whilst we have this like just rich heritage of understanding of the need to go inwards, to go downwards, that's not what we typically see out there when we look, even in not just our kind of mainstream culture, but even when we look at you know, healing work, therapy work, self-development, whatever, all these different ways that we can be seen to be kind of like, you know, becoming more of ourselves, whatever language might be given to it. There absolutely can be this sort of like, we can just keep on. I mean, that word hero, I think, really, like, as an archetype, can be very much what is driving this, like, just go upwards, get shinier, get stronger, get brighter, and do everything in your power not to be collapsed in a heap on the floor, going into the dark depths that you've tried to avoid going to for your whole life until this point. So I'd love to know your sense as to kind of like, how have we ended up there where that's the place not to go, given that's the place the treasure lies?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a rich and it's such a complicated question of kind of, you know, like, what are the facets of our culture that have shaped us and conditioned us away from, you know, this very, to your point, innate knowing. You know, it's like Jung is not creating anything. He's discovering an old truth, and he's trying to put it into context of how the Western mind processes things.
Yes,
and I think
said.
And so, you know, I think some of that, you know, this is really common, I think, in popular, what I would call ego psychology, is this myth that which you are is actually outside yourself, to go, and something you need to go attain. Like, the true version of you is across the street, and if only you could buy this, do this, have this, think this way, you would be that. And that's not the truth. And, you know, I think of my work, and I think of deep work really ultimately being about purification, of kind of the coming into enough self-knowledge that you can discern what is true to yourself. That person you're looking for, you already have it completely, entirely inside yourself. It's really just that we have been so coded by these different conditions that, and identified with those conditions, that we're unable to see, oh, that's me. It's already here. It's not about addition, it's about subtraction. And we have so much of that conditioning in our culture. I mean, I think as deeply in the Western mind, it's, you know, the progress of science in this kind of like knowing, very, very Apollonian sense of going up. We'll figure it out. We'll make order. We'll find clarity. We'll do, right. The depths don't have that, that law. They don't move in that way. I think the Judeo-Christian model is actually very impactful in that, you know, of the story that, you know, Christ the Savior has gone into the underworld, and because he suffered there in your stead, you actually don't have to. You have to believe in him. And in that, there's kind of an annulment of suffering.
Yeah.
In the kind of like personal journey in. I think also, you know,
Can I just
materialism.
say what you just,
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd agree with this, but what I was just seeing is how sin and what we might call here is like the underworld or darkness feel like they could energetically be in a similar place. And so
Mhm.
if you're being told to avoid sin, it also means kind of avoid anything that's like
Mhm.
in that realm of the darkness, the underworld.
Yeah, I mean, and we know historically what, you know, what the kind of the rise of the Judeo-Christian mythos has done to, you know, the ways of thinking that were more interconnected, dark, earthly, chthonic, right? I mean, this is paganism and kind of the extermination of that, of the many and of the dark and of the primal in favor for, you know, what was ordered and what was good in that kind of moral way. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we are probably in some ways unaware of how conditioned that is in us, you know, to kind of find the moral good. And in our culture, the moral good means progress, functioning, order, getting yourself together, you know, that we do not want the unraveling that soul sometimes demands on its own nonlinear timeline. And because we can't produce anything with that, right? We're not successful and functioning and in the kind of wheel of our own materialism with that. And so, you know, people identify with that story, and then they need to be that. They need to be, you know, I write about this in my book. It's like they need to be Hercules. They need to be the strong, conquering hero that can take life in hand and willfully make something happen. Which of course is what my entire book is about, and we don't have to get into that, is that there are other heroes that move very differently than that. Like we can use that heroic power and it doesn't have to be Hercules.
Yes, I really love that. What was just coming to mind is the way that our culture has become, there's different words we could use for this, but what was just in my mind then was very kind of like masculine, direct, like going to what you were saying, the analogy of like the real me, the best me is across the road. And so the right way to go is like as directly in a straight line as quickly as possible. And that feminine, cyclical, meandering route, indirect route is just dismissed as being like, well, why on earth would you do that? Why would you go in the
Absolutely.
wrong direction and take longer?
Well, and I think, you know, for those that work with their clients, you know, it's like I tell people this all the time, like, why do you think growth is a ladder? There's so much shaming that comes in that, of like, I climbed up the ladder and I did something good in myself, or a new part of myself was accessed, or whatever it is, right? And then it's like, oh, and then I fell down the ladder, and what's wrong with me, and how come I didn't do that? As if you were always just supposed to constantly take steps up the ladder. It's like, no, the journey is a serpent, as all mythologies tell us,
Yes, I
is
was
like
just
it
thinking
moves,
of snakes
you
and
know, it
ladders. Yeah.
moves like this, and your turn back around may actually be the straight line you think. It's just not in
Yes.
that kind of like linear, scientific, measurable, you know, Apollonian format. And there can be a lot, you know, our inner world, it responds to the attitudes that we turn towards it. And if we say, what is wrong with this? that's not going to help us, you know, develop what we're trying to develop in ourselves or access what we're trying to access.
Yeah. Goodness me. This feels I had a real sense this was an important conversation to have, and I'm just like, wow, there's just so much here. Like, I feel like this could be one of those ones where we need to do a part 2, actually, because I feel like we haven't even started to go into the depths yet. We're just like preparing the ground. Goodness me. A word that really stood out to me in something you said earlier was functioning. And which can sound like quite a neutral word, but I think it's one of those, like, such an insidious kind of like, it's there behind so many decisions we make, and, you know, consciously and unconsciously, where it's like, even if we've kind of like, we're not even in that, like, I need to be a hero, it's like, at the very least, I need to keep functioning. I need to keep this together. And then, of course, even if we've got responsibilities, you know, children, whatever's, even more so, it like becomes this, like, at all costs I will keep functioning. And I was thinking back over my own life, and I think it sounds quite similar to what you were describing, where on the face of it, I was given several opportunities where I could have gone into the underworld, as in, you know, big traumatic events happening, and yet I was so driven to keep functioning, I didn't. I, like, managed to just, like, as if it barely had happened. And several times, until the point where I really was able to see the value and recognize, like, maybe this is a time, like, to allow myself not to function. The irony in that, when I look back, the kind of time in particular where it really was a kind of like, okay, this is dark night of the soul time, even if it is like taking functioning off the table, I'll go there. Funnily enough, like, sort of day-to-day business sort of just happened. It was like, there was a part of me, it was like, it's okay, like, you know, the important things, children getting fed and stuff's going to happen, and you can go fully here. So, like, there was some sort of magic. It was like, I felt like I was in some way held through that in a way that I wasn't anticipating. But I'd love to know, yeah, anything that arose for you. There's not really a particular question, but I feel like there's just so much here that
In that,
we are, like, journeying with culturally, that stops us doing what I just
totally.
described I finally did.
Well, I feel like there's, you know, kind of like a caveat that, and I won't get into, but I think is important to name, is, you know, kind of what you're speaking about, of like kind of almost choosing the depths in a certain way. And I think there is enough, there is the need in self and in when working with people to discern how much ego strength there actually is in somebody.
Yes.
And that actually is a really important quality. And Jung writes extensively about the need to almost, I think really what's tied to that is like revere the unconscious and really what is down there. And if you do not have, if your client, if yourself do not have the ego strength, meaning the ability to kind of make discernment and separation while you encounter that, then it's not time, and that's okay.
Yes.
Right? This isn't like everybody's got to go there and unravel themselves completely. That is really important, and it does need to be done in a life, but knowing, you know, knowing and respecting that, I think, is kind of an important caveat, and it's not always time. And you know what, the thing that came up for me, you know, in listening to you was kind of the difference between our intention and psyche's intention oftentimes, right? And we can say, you know, like, this isn't good for me. I shouldn't go into this place. I have to function. I have these responsibilities. I have these elements to my life. And the kind of brutal honesty that, you know, that psyche doesn't give a shit about that.
Yes.
You know, and that, like, that project and that kind of individuation, or the telos within to kind of become who you truly are, may pick up a tool that is very dark and very heavy and very frightening. And you may think, I can't do this. I need to function in this ordered way that I think my life is, right? That clinging to what you think your life is, when really your life is over here behind this darkness, and you just it hasn't shown itself to you yet in a certain way. And I think that that piece is really, it's a tension that really has to be held in us, that's challenging, of like, oh, I wasn't supposed to have this, I was supposed to be functioning in this like plan that I was doing. Like, says who?
Yes.
Who's the supposed to in you?
Mm.
Right?
So
Because
so
I mean,
because
I
yeah.
well, I was
Yeah,
just wondering, like for you, like how much has your life been given to you by following that dark place?
oh my goodness.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. And whether it be me or whether it be our clients, there's so many times, and again, it's looking back, you can see if that hadn't happened, this thing that I would have given anything at the time to have not had
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
If I could have avoided this, if I could have,
Yeah.
that shouldn't have happened to me, but it did. And actually, now I look back, if it hadn't happened, all of this that's happened since wouldn't have been. But for me, there was one in particular event that happened. It was the very sudden and quite shocking death of my father.
Mm.
And for many reasons, it wasn't a kind of straightforward death, like, if there is such a thing, but it was a particularly unstraightforward death. And yet, I I mean, it's hard to ever say, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be where I am, because it was meant to happen and it has happened. And,
Mhm.
I guess if that hadn't happened, some other thing would have happened to bring me to where I am. But that was the thing that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I it's interesting when it is something like that that involves these themes of death, these themes of, a loved one, of loss. I think it's even more challenging to recognize like the treasure there, the beauty there, what that
100%.
really held for us. But we
100%.
have to be willing to look there. We have to be honest
Yeah.
about it. um Truthfully, I am deeply grateful
Mhm.
to my father's death for
Mhm.
bringing me, really, like, kind of catapulting me onto my path.
Yeah. Well, and what comes up for me in that is too is like the cultivation of patience. Like in that functioning bias, there's so much rush. And so something
Yes.
happens to us and it's like, well, why haven't I found the treasure so hard to attain in it? It's like, hey, 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 like that may
Mm,
come and it will come, but it's not going to happen 10 days after something's happened to us, right? Which is like
mm.
when we start thinking, okay, I've taken enough time off work and I need to be like back there and fixed and like
Yes.
back in my function controlled, like stable, safe place. And, we have really lost connection as a culture with, the underworld experience, meaning the kind of obscured parts of our beings as having something really fertile in them.
Mm,
Right? We forget that soil and dark and deep is like where things grow from. And all of, the ancient rites that honored that are just memories at this point. And, you know, we're so rushed to kind of clean ourselves up. We're a very hygienic culture. And, how can we almost like produce something out of the darkness as fast as we can and say, well, it at least was like a functional experience. It gave me a lot.
mm,
And like that comes, but to the point that you're making, like it doesn't come right away. There's a lot of patience
mm.
that's required in us, um, and in others.
Yes. When you're talking about that rush, what I was thinking is, in my journey with shamanism, there were certainly points in the early days where, if, for example, we were entering a ceremony, which could be, I don't know, all day and night long, potentially very messy, and all the ingredients that kind of like we do our best to kind of like keep at bay in our modern
Mhm.
culture. And there was certainly, like what you're talking about here, there's an embodied unlearning of some of those things that have been kind of like very much conditioned in culturally,
Mhm.
like that, let's do things as efficiently as possible and as clean as possible,
Mhm.
as comfortably as possible.
As comfortable as
And
possible, absolutely.
yeah, and it was like a way in, I started to realize it's like, even if the ceremony itself didn't actually like have any magic, if it didn't actually do anything itself, what it's teaching me about not needing to kind of like have things be this like direct efficient process, and to just be in this thing that kind of like often makes no sense to the rational mind.
No, not at all.
It really is that entering into that dark underbelly.
Yeah.
That was such an embodied learning of kind of like, wow, and this is so different to the kind of daylight world of our modern culture, where that makes no sense. Like, why on earth would you spend 12 hours, 24 hours in a ceremony like that? Why would you do that?
Yeah. Well, and I think, it's so important to see that that preference for rationality is a preference,
Mm,
right? It's not an absolute truth. We come from a culture that prefers that and treats it as our God, but it's not,
mm,
right? And I think there's an increasing starvation or anemia in our culture for the mythic, for the ensouled, for the alive, for the depths, right? Because we have to remember that not everything that is in the darkness is terrible. It's all
yes.
dipped in something archetypal and
Mm,
alive, so it can kind of take on that quality. But most of us repress the best parts of ourselves just as much as we repress the worst, right? Or we're
mm,
disconnected from our potential because, it didn't fit into our family system, or we don't feel like we're worthy enough, or the many different kind of ways that that can manifest. And so we're our refusal to go in is like an antibiotic, right? It's taking the good and the bad. And,
mm,
we're doing it on this altar of I need to be controlled, I need to be together. And then sometimes I see in like teaching that I've done in the kind of college age, I oftentimes feel there's this real ask for a permission to suffer where
mm.
they use, it's like, and I feel like this is getting kind of like co-opted by a lot of psychological language where it's like, oh yeah, my latte was too hot, it was really traumatic. And you're like, what? That's not what that word means. Like, it's like they throwing around these like really big terms or creating these really like the semantic debate around what they feel. And it oftentimes, and I've said this to students that I've worked with, it's like what I see in this is you're just asking that if I could say that I have this issue, that I've been traumatized, that I this, then I don't have to be perfect. Then I don't have to know, then I don't have to be in control, that I don't have to be together. And they're like looking for this permission to be like, you know what? You could just be something else.
Mm,
And which a lot of times, students feel like what, one of the stories that stands out for me is we had some kind of conversation like this. And after class, this girl came up to me and she was like, I just want to let you know that I think you're the most empathetic person I've ever met, which is not true. Like that is that's not true about who I am. And I have that, but it's not, and what I said to her was, and I think it was like day 3 or 4 of the class. I didn't even like I was trying to remember her name still, like, you know, it was like, and I told her, I was like, I don't know enough about you to have empathy, but I think what you're saying is you feel really seen by these ideas in a
Mm,
really deep
yes.
way that no one else has really allowed you to see. So it's getting, of course, like transferred onto me, but really like, wait a second, you don't have to be ordered, perfect, in control. What happens if these deep and dark places, if you treat them as having fertility, of having something for you, of having actually will give you your strength? I'm sure you know this experience of like really being with yourself on a deep level. It's like, I say this to my clients all the time when they're in those places. I'm like, congratulations. It's like you're with what you didn't think you could be with, and you're learning to
Mm,
be with it. You're accessing your own capacity. That's amazing. That's not going to happen in the daylight
mm,
when you're like, on your couch comfortable scrolling on whatever, dissociative trance you're in. It's like
yes.
it's not gonna be real for you. And I think people are starved for that.
Mm. You just brought something to mind that was thinking about earlier. I'm sure you see this in your work too. Often when we're working with clients over an extended period, what can happen, and probably happens more often than not actually, is they'll suddenly, without any obvious external cause, re-experience something that kind of they felt they'd kind of overcome or cured or hadn't
Mhm.
experienced for however many years or decades. And it's like, I don't understand it. Like in the past, I always knew this was triggered by this, or this was something I felt like I'd got on top of. And all of a sudden, it's like sort of re-energized. And my understanding when that happens, it very much is, as you're saying, it's like this emergence, this opening where they are now in a place for all sorts of reasons, the ego maturation that they have in place, the fact that they do have the support, in that instance of us to hold them through the work, that they are ready to go into whatever's there that they weren't ready to go into before.
Totally.
And yeah, I'd love to hear your sense of that, because it's like wonderful. Like you look at, where you are. This is just gorgeous. You're ready now to go in and become intimate with it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're making a really good point too. And it makes me, it makes me kind of touch in on the kind of the autonomy of the unconscious and of the deep places in us. And, our work is this strange combination of kind of like the briar tangle patch that is all of our inner personal everythings that are like this all the time, tangled together, and trying to kind of open and create space in that. So on the other side, that which is not of us and is of our journey can kind of come through, right? Because we're not making that happen. And so, we think that, I think it's like, I'm going to willfully make myself, confront my shadow, or like today we're going to work on the mother complex right now. And it's like, okay, great. But like, that may not actually be available, opened in you enough. Right. And when that is, it'll come through on its own terms. And then you have to meet that. Right. And be open to what it wants to kind of show you in that moment. Right. And I think we like in our hygienic mind this idea that, okay, I've had this conversation and I've seen this part of myself and whatever it is. And so it's like, now I just like need to kind of tie that up and put it on the shelf. And it's really inconvenient in that way of thinking when old things come back wearing new clothes. And you're like, wait a second, I thought that we dealt with this, and now this is a different image of it or a different expression of it. And it's like, of course it is, right? Some other layer, of the onion is showing itself because you, as you're speaking to, have done enough work to open something in yourself that another aspect can show itself, or maybe that aspect needs to show itself now, and, as a Jungian, I work with dreams, and it's like, dreams are so of the other realm, and, you're not making your dream. And if you've had a really powerful dream, that's very clear, that you're not the dream maker. And so what in you is the dream responding to that is now available in you that might not have been available 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or 2 months ago?
I love the way that you've made that comparison with dreams, because I think we all recognize we don't control dreams, and there really isn't probably a clearer indication of kind of that which we're ready to see is being provided in dream form. Why would we think that we have any more control over the other ways that it's presented to us? I think that's really helpful to recognize.
Well, go ahead.
No, there's a little bit of a story, but you go first.
Well, I was just going to say, like, that control fantasy and what we were talking about earlier with functioning, and is such an interesting march in the Western mind. It's like the idea that we actually individually have autonomy over our lives is actually very new, like very new. And I don't see, I think, if we take the kind of history of psychology, so to speak, it's important to see that we as a people moved from, traditional structures of knowing and of spirituality that were connected to the land, that were connected to community, and moved into, over many years, moved into cities, into this kind of like scientific, industrialized way, disconnected ourselves from those sources of wisdom, and then invented psychology and called ourselves sick. It's like, and we moved into this individual realm that was like, I'm going to control, do, figure out, function on my own, thinking that it is my own willful power alone that creates my life. And for most people, that's far too great of an idea to actually hold well. And it creates neurosis, it creates sickness, it creates, the host of issues that we have that are really us disconnecting from source.
Yes. Yeah. This notion of control, it's almost like the only logical outcome, like to have, if once you've got to that point where I'm the individual in control of this, of course all I'm going to want is more control. I think that goes right to the heart of it. The little story I was about to tell was talking about how we kind of like spiral like further and further or deeper and deeper into ourselves when we're ready. And I had something funny happen yesterday where I went out for dinner with my sister and my cousin. On the way back, my sister, when she dropped me off, we just ended up sitting in the car talking for literally an hour. Like, just, it's like, I was meant to be like, thank you, get out the car, go. We just ended up going like deep into like all of our family history. And then I have done so much work on my relationship with my mother, who's passed away a few years ago. But hey, these relationships don't stop after death. And I've done so much work on, all things related to me and my mother. And I really had this delusion that there was nothing more left to see. And then my sister said something where I like literally did a bit of like a double take, like, really? And it brought into question my whole, like, for about a 18-year period of my life, from like birth to when I was 18, this simple thing she said, like, completely, like, I was just like, oh my goodness, that's true. And
Yeah.
that's completely different to what I thought had happened.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness, like, 5 years of extra therapy right there. Not that it was even a bad thing, it wasn't like a negative thing, but it was just like this like
Yeah, but like
opens up a whole
another layer,
portal. Mm.
another layer gets exposed, and like that makes me think too of in the kind of underworld conversation about how easy, how easy it is to find ourselves in the underworld, right? It doesn't, in this, I think in this global age, in our own journeys, anyone who's self-reflective, anyone who works with clients who are really stewed in that in a certain way, it's like you can just like find yourself in this realm where it's like it's disoriented, it's dark, there's like heavy big things, all these different elements. And we need to learn how to respect and be in that space, because life is going to wake this up in us all the time, right? And I think one of the things that we see happening so much is that people do not have the ability, the value, right? That, wait a second, these deep and dark places, the insight that I didn't know that I needed, or, just kind of hit me like a bus, these touches from the unknown, right? They have value, right? And if we don't in ourselves believe that, we will continue to project them out onto other people and say it's your fault and your problem and your issue. If you need to make this better, I need to attack you, kill you, whatever it is, right, on a global scale, that then I'll be comfortable again. And so, that happens on a macro that's so important. And I think, as you've said, many, of your listeners work specifically with people in the healing arts, and it's like that has to be done as a practitioner in yourself. So, because otherwise the door will not open in your clients, right? It won't be available energetically in the room. It won't be accessible to them if you're shutting that in yourself in a certain way, right? And saying, well, this is bad, or I need to fix you, or I'm, you're paying me a fee and I need to like make you feel better, and lean into that projection, like all on a practitioner level, like we have to go against all of that so that it's available for the client in the space. So that, maybe that's kind of like what happens with your sister, right? Is it's like, it's available for you guys to talk about something really real. So it comes. And if she was shut off to that and didn't want to say the hard thing to you or point out something, it would have never had space to kind of sprout.
Yes, I love this so much. And I think this is something where even those of us that are in this kind of work, with an understanding of all the things we've been speaking about, I have this sense of like, we almost can't hear this enough.
Yeah.
You know, even as you're talking, I feel like I've got parts of me that are kind of like, oh, yes, yes, yes. Like I need to hear this again and again and again, because
Okay.
it is so counter to
Yeah.
all of our cultural conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Mm,
it takes, it's like I think about myself as a practitioner and like what I've had to do in my own inner journey to kind of kill off the part of myself that felt like it needed to fix my clients. I would say honestly, that's realizing I can't fix myself and like getting rid of that part of myself that was really, that's, like I was saying in the beginning, the hero that was like, oh, I've got it. I'm going to rescue. I'm going to fix. I'm going to do. I'm going to provide. I'm going to control. And really seeing, oh, wait, that's actually limiting my own experience completely. And the moments where that steps offline, something else comes in that's actually what's giving me, who I am in a certain way, or connection to that. And that part of ourselves has to really be worked on in order for you as the practitioner to be able to sit with the space needed in another for them to kind of thrash around and get into what is so uncomfortable and even say what is so uncomfortable. Right? If we're caught in the web of I need to produce, I need to function, I need to be a good practitioner and have them like me and, get referrals and make more, it's like, then you're not doing the work. And you have to kind of be able to ride out and meet that switch from fixing symptom to what is soul saying here. And I think that begins as an inner project, because otherwise your unconscious psyche is going to be in the room, trying to get your client to, lay a perfect golden egg for you when that's not what needs to happen.
yes, I love this so much. Um, One of the archetypes I'm like just head over heels in love with is the wounded healer, the myth of Chiron. And as I'm sure you know, Jung said something like only the wounded physician heals. And that just came to mind as we're talking, this notion that isn't wrong. This is always going to be present for us as working as healers, whether we call ourselves healers or not. Also within our clients, particularly if they're called, often the people who come to us are often people who are actually in the kind of work, just like listeners of doing this themselves. And this kind of like, whether we call it the wound, whether we call it the underworld, this part of ourselves that is going to keep calling us into a deeper life, into ourselves,
Yeah.
to like honor that, to be
Yeah.
intimate, to be present to it,
Yeah.
I think is is the thing that throughout this conversation, it's almost like it's kind of like come center stage to like, yes, I have a place here in our lives, in our world.
Yeah.
Allow me to have that space.
Yeah. Well, and
Mm,
the wounded healer archetype, it's so much about that the healing will flow out of your wound and it will flow
mm,
between you in that space. And so, that doesn't mean, right, this is kind of that, like a little nod to that comment that I made about ego strength, right? It's like, that doesn't mean that you are touching that part of yourself and just like weeping on, in front of your client or whatever it is. It just means that you've opened it and said, yeah, I get this.
mm,
Right. And are letting that actually, to your point, like be. And, it makes me think of one of the losses in the modern world is, historically, we have always feared the underworld and the afterlife and the deep and the dark, right? But one of the very first things that we know that humans did was make rights to those spaces. It's like we've always feared it, but we've always had reverence for it. We've always acknowledged something
mm,
down there is profound and maybe mysterious in a way we'll never understand. But there is something powerful and alive in that. And we've always been, like I said, frightened, but always in relationship. And this is a
mm,
really new thing for us to sit in front of a client and focus only on functioning order and not the kind of erosion of one's being or soul or what's happening in a deep place, you know, and it's, and if you look at it that way, it's almost like, well, whoa, where have we gotten off track? Why are we not paying attention to this, to
Mm.
this great knowing?
Yes, I love what you're saying there. That kind of conscious relationship, rather than in this modern world, it's like a kind of dismissal, denial of something that, again, still comes from fear, but it's a different kind of fear.
Yeah.
We're almost up on time, but one final thing that feels might be interesting to talk about is, again, because we're all going to be subject to this kind of like, nope, let's like not talk about the darkness. um my sense is, and I've certainly experienced this personally, but I don't think this is at all personal to me, is, and I think you mentioned something similar earlier, is the way that our clients will have that same sense of, this isn't working, you know, something's going wrong, I feel worse than I did when I came in, you know, projecting onto, you know, whatever the practitioner, therapist, what is, you know, projecting it onto them, like, how have you, you know, why aren't you saving me, why have you made it so actually feel worse? And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we journey with that, and again, in a conscious way.
I mean, it's a really hard projection, and it's a really hard projection not to, you know, identify with. So, like I was saying, kind of had two answers to that. The first one, kind of a little bit of a repeat of what I was saying of, you know, this begins with you. Like, this is an inside job. And, you know, when that projection gets thrown on you, you can identify with it and say, oh yeah, why am I not fixing them? And I should be fixing them. And that's going to wake up a really different response than you having your own relationship with that, you know, that the fixer in yourself, right? And the fixer and the conditioning in yourself to be able to make the more appropriate response to your client is, you know, something along the lines of, you know, like, why do you think that I should fix you? What does fix, like, what does fixed even mean? What is that goal in you? You know, and really engaging with that question, because what I've found too, which kind of maybe leads me into my other point, is like, people know this, like they really do know it, you know. And if you say like, I don't have the magic wand, what do you think the magic wand is? You know, what are you imagining, or what's the fantasy around where you should be right now? And why is that? It's like they know that to be true, and most people will actually go that, but you have to not take the bait. And I think that's the most kind of important element to, you know, how to work with people in an underworld space, is really your attitude towards that, to not take the bait, to find, you know, to find something valuable in that space. And that you have to go against a lot of conditioning for that and be really strong in that. And you know, and maybe, you know, to my second point, it's almost even hard to kind of untangle where you as the practitioner begin and like the work, because it is so, you know, much about how you hold it. And so just acknowledging that that's like hard to untangle. But I think, you know, like also in that is trying to connect people to, it's like, I mean, there's a lot of words we could use for it. It's like trying to connect people to a larger picture in a certain way of what's happening to them in that moment. Like, it makes me think of the value of myth. And when you tell people a myth, it's like it's connecting them to this larger story and this it kind of nutrient in a certain way that comes from that. And I think the underworld can be a really myopic place for people of, I'm suffering, I'm in pain, like, get me out, I'm thrashing around and you need to do this and this is your promise. And it's more like, hey, let's step back and look at something larger here in a certain way. And I think it kind of slows people down, if that makes sense. And it is just kind of like not leaning into the individual pain in a certain way and saying, yeah, well, what is this a part of that's larger for you? Or what do you believe this, you know, somebody passes away and it's like, what do you believe happens after death? You know, it's like moving them into this larger place. Cause I think that the human psyche is struggling in its individualism.
Yes.
And it wants to kind of be a part of something. And the underworld is suffering is what is shared by us all. We have so much into that. And I write about this in my book, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it is on our question, is one of the things I discovered in my, in the research in my doctoral dissertation that became the book, was, reading all these myths. And I specifically focused on the Greek pantheon of the underworld descent and people in the underworld and heroes and gods. And then when they come back up, it's like described in like 1 or 2 sentences. It's really fascinating. And it's kind of like, and then he was at the top. And I found that so interesting, because I actually find the ascent to be the harder part. It's like, like I was saying earlier, the underworld happens. We lose a loved one, a complex grips us, there's a global tragedy that we're, involved in or witnessing in some capacity. It's like those deepening things are actually very easy, but how do we consciously and thoughtfully come back up? And I think a lot of people are addicted to that which we see in the mythology of just like, and then I was on the top. It's like, can you just make me better? I came to you and I spent, X amount of money on an hour. Can't I already be there? Like, can't I already be on the top? And it's like, that's not how it works. It's never worked that way.
I love that so much. Yes, that's, in fact, maybe we do need to do part 2, which really like looks at kind of like what might, if that bit isn't spoken about, is a line or 2. What often can that look like? What supports that when it's the right time? I love what you've said there. It made me remember right at the beginning of our conversation where you were saying how you opened that book and kind of like just that the energy of the myths, of the archetypes, it's like you can feel it. It touches into like this embodied remembrance. And I think you're right, whether we're working specifically with a client in the instance where there's that kind of projection, this notion of kind of like, why am I not better? And there's this invitation to look more widely. This again is what myths do, whether it's, for example, the really obvious one like Persephone, and like understanding this isn't an individual kind of, this is, something that's happening for you and for you alone. This is a pattern, a journey that we take. This is as it is meant to be, and this touches into something that is felt, is known, is more than just the words of a story.
Yes, and that connecting to that known sensibility in somebody, right? That's the kind of still anchor that will help them, right? And that those stories, right, they remind us that suffering is shared by us all, and that there's a beautiful Buddhist parable where a woman, she goes to the Buddha and she had just lost her son, and she tells, in all of her grief, she begs the Buddha to bring her son back to life, and he says, of course, but I will need 3 things from you. You must go into the village and you must find me 3 golden mustard seeds, and they must come from a house that no one has ever experienced suffering in. And she's like, great, and scurries off and goes to the village and goes from house to house to house to house and cannot find a single home where someone has not suffered, and comes back to the Buddha finally aware, right, that the suffering, the deep, the dark, the pain is actually what we all share. And we need to remember that connectivity, right? It's not just about the individual, especially in this time. I think there's an enormous collective energy to what's going on for all of us. And there's something, we don't have to worry about doing it. We're not creating it, but there is a healing magic that comes from, like you're saying, connecting people to the archetypal background of their being, so that the kind of juices and the moisture of that realm can hold them in a certain way. And suddenly that small thrashing life that's suffering and needs to be fixed is a part of something greater. And that, it's like, let the ocean hold the boat.
Yes. This is a conversation that I don't want to end, but we need to. But it very much is my hope that this is only a goodbye for now. In
Yes.
the meantime, where can listeners find out more about you and your wonderful work?
So if you're interested in the kind of, little glimpses of my book that I've spoken about, my book is called Forged in Darkness.
Great
You can,
name.
thank you. Yeah, I fought hard for that name. It wasn't a popular name for some of the
Really?
publishers, but I was like, that's the name of the book.
Of
um,
course.
um, that can be bought on, I would say like most major booksellers. If you're in the UK listening, it was originally published by Watkins, which I would imagine can be found, as it is a British publishing company.
It
Um,
is.
and and also at my website, where there are links to the books, there's other podcast interviews I've done. In that, if you're interested in potential work or other conversations, like all of those links and ways to find me are all on my website, which I imagine it's ionpsychotherapy.com, but that can, I would imagine, be found in the kind of notes to this podcast. So
Certainly will.
pretty easy to track down on that front.
Wonderful. Thank you so much,
You're
Joanna. This has
welcome.
been a absolute delight. And yes, one that I know that listeners are going to love. So thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you. Always an honor to talk about what feels true.